At the last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the light of the trees forever. Michael Vonnen and well met, my friends. Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we're going to take a look at an interesting question. Why are the High Elves so powerful in Middle-earth? And hopefully the answer to this question will shed more light on the Silmarillion and how the elves came to diminish through The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. There will be some related articles, discussions, and videos in the description and cards to further explore this question, so please check those out. Thank you to those who voted on today's topic in last week's poll, and those who voted for a Feanor history, don't worry, I'll cover that one sometime next month. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Let's begin our exploration of the power of the High Elves back with the original three ambassadors of the Quendi, or Elves. These were Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë, who represented the Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri clans respectively, and would go on to be the kings of these elven clans. For more explanation on the clans themselves, I have made a video that covers those, so please check that out. Anyway, these three would be welcomed by Arome the Huntsman of Valinor to come to Valinor during 1102 of the Years of the Trees. One of the greatest things these three elves beheld in Valinor, before returning to their folk in Cuiviénen, was the light of Valinor, which at that time was the greatest light in the world, for there was no sun and no moon. The light was given off by the two trees of Valinor, Laurelin the golden tree and Telperion the silver tree, whose last fruit and flower would become the sun and moon respectively. The three ambassadors dwelt in Valinor for some time before returning to their folk in 1104. Then they would attempt to bring their elves back to Valinor with them. While many elves would attempt the journey, less would actually make it to Valinor, for many among the Teleri, Elwë's clan, and even Elwë himself, who would later be called Ilu Thingol, would linger in Middle-earth, while some elves, the Avari, were unwilling and would not be counted among the Eldar, not even attempting the journey to Valinor and staying in the east. Now, to put it simply, those who eventually came to Valinor were called the Calaquendi, the Light Elves. These were the High Elves, while those who stayed in Middle-earth were the Moraquendi, the Dark Elves. Those who made it to Valinor were Ingwe and his clan, the Vanyar, Finwë and his clan, the Noldor, and some Teleri, called the Falmari, the elves who dwelt by the sea in Valinor. Their king would be Olwë, the brother of Elwë, or Thingol. Now let's discuss Thingol for a moment, as he proves to be an exception to many others of his kin. Besides those Teleri who did go to Valinor alongside his brother Olwë, Thingol would be the only one of his clan, and the only one of his elves, the Sindar, to ever go to Valinor and behold the light of the two trees, thus seemingly making him also a High Elf. Furthermore, he would marry Amaya, Melion, one of the beings of lesser power but still of the same race as the Valar themselves, the Ainur. Throughout Thingol's life, his proximity and history with the power of the West, having seen the light of the two trees and being married to one of the Maiar, would make him powerful himself, in my mind, the most powerful elf of the Sindar to have ever lived. With the exception, of course, being Luthien, who also had Maiar blood within her. But even Thingol paled in comparison to some of the elves who dwelt in the West. So, let's take a look at the Calaquendi, these elves of light, and why they are so much more powerful than the Dark Elves of Middle-earth. It seems there is most definitely an argument to be made that the closer an elven group dwelt to the Valar and their light, the more inherently powerful and pure they were. So starting with the Falmari, who dwelt near the eastern sea in Valinor, in places like Alqualondë and Tol Eressëa, it may be that these were the weakest of the Light Elves, though they did have favor with the Maiar of the Sea and Olmo, the Vala of the Seas himself. For indeed, of the Calaquendi, except Thingol himself, they dwelt furthest from the light of the two trees of Valinor, and furthest from most of the Valar in the more central and western parts of Valinor. Then there were the Noldor, elves who were mighty crafters, lore masters, and warriors. They lived mostly in the city Tirion, although a few like Feanor would dwell during a time further to the north in Formenos. They were friends with Aule the Smith, the greatest craftsman in the world, and the creator of the Dwarven kindred. Finally, there were the Vanyar, who were poets and singers, who amongst the elves dwelt closest to the two trees of Valinor in Tirion, and then later moved to dwell near Ilmarin, the mansion of Manwë and Varda upon Taniquetil. Indeed, these elves were the most beloved by Manwë and Varda, the king and queen of all the Valar, and the Lord of Wind and the Lady of Stars. So we already have a hierarchy of power and purity within the elves during the Years of the Trees and so forth, and then those who went back into Middle-earth, such as the Noldor, would perish and or diminish their grace from how they had been while they dwelt in Valinor and in comparison to those who remained in Valinor. Thus, the greatest and most powerful of the elves, in my mind, are the Vanyar, the most beloved of the elves by Manwë and Varda, who remained in Valinor. Then the Noldor of King Finarfin, who repented from the journey back into Middle-earth during the exile of the Noldor and remained in Valinor. Then the Falmari, who survived the kinslaying. These elves would only go back into Middle-earth to fight in the War of Wrath and bring about the end of Morgoth in Middle-earth, alongside those who survived in Beleriand. The Noldor who went into Middle-earth, even those with some Vanyaran blood in them, would indeed be some of the most powerful elves in Beleriand and Middle-earth while they remained, more powerful than those who had always only dwelt in Middle-earth, but most were overcome and defeated. Elves such as Feanor and his sons, Fingolfin, Fingon, Turgon, Finrod, Galadriel, and many others would come into Middle-earth and be some of the greatest and most powerful of the elves, due to their time in Valinor under the light of the two trees and their associations with the Valar, but most of these would perish in some battle or another in Middle-earth, and their souls would find their ways back to the halls of Mandos in the uttermost west. Those who survived, like Galadriel, would be counted among the most powerful elves in Middle-earth, even in future ages. The blood of the High Elves would mix more with the blood of the elves of Middle-earth as time went on, diluting or changing whatever strength was in that bloodline of the elves of old. Now, something I am unsure about, and I would love to hear your thoughts on in the comments below, is did these beings lose more of their power over time? So did Galadriel, for instance, lose more of her innate power the longer she dwelt in Middle-earth? Now, I know Galadriel would be the keeper of Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings, and that ring would give her power as well, but I wonder if she was made weaker being in Eastern lands, and was actually more powerful in the First Age and the Years of the Trees. I'm unsure, as there are arguments both ways to be made on that, for she achieves greater feats of power in the Third Age than she does explicitly in the First Age. However, there is a general theme in Tolkien's works concerning the weakening of power over time. Let me further elaborate on that last point. I imagine that after the destruction of the two trees of Valinor in 1495 of the Years of the Trees, the elves born in Valinor afterwards would never be as powerful as their fathers and mothers who had dwelt in that light aforehand. Even though the High Elves who were born and dwelt in Valinor in later ages must have still been more powerful than those who dwelt and were born in Middle-earth. In Tolkien's works, there is an element of nostalgia for days gone by, the Elder Days, which in my mind is one of the reasons why Tolkien's works are so beloved. Look at the many kindreds who dwelt in Middle-earth, for instance. The elves would remember and be sorrowful about the lands of Beleriand that drowned beneath the sea, the kingdoms, realms, cities that were gone forever. They would mourn their friends and families they believed to have been imperishable and truly immortal, that they would never see again, ere their own deaths or the breaking of the world itself. With dwarves, they mourned their mountain homes of old, lost to the sea, or dragons, or balrogs, or orcs. They missed their great kings and treasures of gold and crafts that they would never see again. Men missed the height of their days with Numenor, and their forefathers whose valor saw the downfall of dark lords. Even Ents missed their Entwives, who left long ago. This element of nostalgia and even sorrow of recalling places and peoples that we shall never see again is a major motif in Tolkien's works, and I think that applies to our question here today. Elves like valiant Fingolfin or Turgon of Gondolin or Finrod the Beloved would never be seen again in the Third Age of the world, and although some, like Elrond, Celeborn, and Thranduil, would mirror others who came before, like Thingol, or even those who may not have seen the light of the two trees like Eärendil, except that which survived in the Silmarils and the Sun and the Moon, these elves of later days would not be nearly as powerful as those who came before. Even Glorfindel of Gondolin, who returned to Middle-earth in the Second Age, whose true power was beheld by Frodo in the Unseen Realm, would not participate much in the great events of the War of the Ring, for instance, and it's possible that his power was not even as great as it once had been. And so, as the wise and powerful were defeated or faltered throughout the ages, and Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor, would perish to Sauron, just like Fingolfin being slain by Morgoth, the hands of the weaker would have to do. And though I do not mean to be disrespectful to the elves of later ages, who accomplished great things in the world of Middle-earth, and were great characters themselves, like Legolas and Arwen, they just did not have the power of those who beheld the light of the two trees, those who had dwelt with the Valar and learned from them directly. But perhaps, in some way, these later elves were wiser, using what strength they had for common good, and not for vanity, just as some of the elves of the Elder Days did. And so we come to the end of our tale and explanation concerning why the High Elves were so powerful. From this tale we see that it is not power that truly counts, but for what purpose it is used. Indeed, the Vanyar were greatest in power, but it was more the Noldor and Sindar who secured Middle-earth for those who dwelt there in later ages and would inherit the earth. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections about why the High Elves were so powerful? Let me know in the comments below. It's interesting to see how the elements of nostalgia, history, and the Valar, as well as their land and light, play into the power of the elves, and it's fascinating to see how power was balanced amongst the elves of our stories. To further support the channel, please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for a podcast and Discord server. All of those links are in the description below. Royan and I just did a podcast on Patreon about the Rings of Power, so if that sounds interesting, please head on over and check that out. I want to shout out our Valar tier patrons: Adrian De La Torre, Chris Ortner, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putenham, Mark Kralik, Blair Scott and Tobias Goldner, Ryan Ramsey, Adam Rink, Merton, John Hume, Tom Bombadil, Reggie93, Chip Slade, Jennifer Wood, and Sam McBee. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. And I'll see you all again later this week with a special video for Tolkien Reading Day in collaboration with my fellow Tolkien channels. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.